Josh.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to St Mary's and to Sundays at 7.
Thank you very much.
Your work with LICC, I would like to talk to you about in some detail in the second part. But first of all, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. You were born into a loving and Christian and supportive home, and your parents and grandparents are all Christians. But how old were you when you knew the faith was real for you and you made a serious commitment? And tell me about your family.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it's delightful to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me. My family roots run right through this church. So my grandparents, Peter and Cynthia, who are here this evening, have been a part of this church for a long time. And my dad, Phil, my uncle Rob, were part of this church. And so being here is lovely because there's a lot of family history here. For me, faith was just always part of the furniture growing up. I mean, my parents, to this day, praise the Lord, their faith is still such a part of who they are, such a part of the way they live. You know, prayer was just part of the routine of our days. We would always end the day as a family praying together, and it never felt kind of like a weird, separate thing we did. It wasn't like we sort of lived our lives and then there was like the Christian bit that happened on a Sunday morning or that we sort of did sometimes. It was just part of the air. You know, when we were kids and we were being kind of told what it was to be a human being, we were taught that, you know, being who we were, my sister and I, was a bit of mum and a bit of dad and something special from God, and it was just kind of part of who we were. And that was very much the case growing up, but at the same time, it was also not something where I felt like I was being forced into it. I never had any sense that, you know, if I'd said to my parents when I got to the age where I could do that, if I'd said to them, I actually really want to go to church this Sunday, I never had the feeling that they would have sort of gone, well, that's outrageous, and how could you possibly, and you know, this you've shamed the family or anything like that. It was always very much, I felt there was a sense that I would be allowed to make that decision, and that was very key. I think that faith was treated as something that our parents had, but that we were being encouraged to discover for ourselves. And I think for me, the moment it became real, I mean, in a sense, I feel like we often feel this pressure to have like a moment that you can point to and say, that was my road to Damascus moment. And I don't particularly think that's true. I think for me, it's been a process over my life. But I do remember one particular evening at my youth group when I was probably about 15 or 16. And everybody else in the youth group had, well, not everybody else, but a number of people had been having quite kind of spectacular Holy Spirit experiences over the previous few months. There'd been, you know, people being slain in the Spirit and people having kind of miraculous prayers answered, and it hadn't been something that I'd seen. And I remember we had a prayer evening, and I kind of sat there being very cross with God and going, why isn't this happening for me? And what are you doing, God? And why isn't this? Why, blah, blah, blah. And I remember there being this clear sense of just calm down. It's okay. I know you. I know you better than you know yourself. I'll interact with you in the way that's best for you. There isn't some kind of tick list here where if you get a particular kind of Holy Spirit moment, that makes you a better Christian. And that for me was the moment I kind of thought, oh, wow, this God is actually there. And I was baptized age 16, 17, and that was for me kind of that moment, I think.
You've said some nice things about family and growing up, but when you wrote to me, you said that school was not particularly a fun time for you. Why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't have a particularly joyful time in school. I think it's fair to say. I know some people absolutely love it. For me, I think I just never really felt like I found my people at school. It was one of those things where there were happy times, there were good times, but there was always a sense that the friends I had at school were at best sort of there because I had to have somebody to talk to, and I never really felt like I had a strong core of good friends. And it's an interesting thing as I've grown up and I've met other people, I've realized that perhaps the environment in my school was worse than I thought it was. I'd kind of grown up with stories of the old Birkenhead Institute where my dad went, which I think was properly unpleasant, and in comparison to that, my school was nothing. But there was quite a culture of kind of casual abuse towards each other. Kids were very mean to each other, so it was not a particularly joyful place to be, it's fair to say.
Over the years, many people have told me that coming from a Christian home has meant they struggled at school. Why do you think that is when you come from a Christian home? Is that a hard thing to keep going when you're in the kind of environment that you've just mentioned now?
Possibly. I mean, I don't think for me that my Christian faith was sort of connected in a sense to the reasons I didn't particularly enjoy school. I certainly was never, sort of particularly targeted for bullying because I was a Christian. That wasn't really part of it. I suppose there is a degree to which, if you're taking your faith seriously, then you are called to try and live in a particular way that is, others focused and selfless. And how good any teenager is at doing that, I don't know. But I suppose there is a degree in which you are being you're trying to live in a way that may be distinctive from the crowd around you, rather than taking the easy way out of just joining in with the unpleasant banter and joining in with the negativity. But I think for me it wasn't a huge part of it, and I think probably now, my sort of sense is that for most young people in school now who come from Christian homes, that actually they are, most people around them will have very little sense of what being a Christian means at all. The kind of, increasingly over the last few decades, the sort of Christian backdrop, if you like, that most people used to grow up in this country, has dropped off to such a degree that most people, if they tell their friends at school they're a Christian, they'll kind of go, "What's that?" rather than, "I know exactly what that is, and I'm going to make fun of you for it." So I think now there's or just unknown. So it's probably quite a different thing now.
You briefly mentioned this before, but as you moved into your teenage years, you said that your youth home group was a critical part of your faith journey, and the support you received was a great help before you ultimately went to university. How was that?
Yeah, so the youth group I was part of from the age of, I suppose, 11 or 12 through to 18 was, critical in my faith for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, because it was full of really nice people my age who I just really wanted to be around. And although I never particularly felt a strong urge to leave the church or to stop going to church, a big part of why I was really keen to be part of church was because there were these great people my age who were just wonderful, and it was lovely to be around them. So that was really important. I think also the leaders of the groups were extremely good at, again, giving us agency and giving us a sense that they were not here to just impart orthodoxy to us and sort of tell us the answers and here's the thing you must recite back to us, this is the orthodoxy. But they would present difficult things, interesting, things that we were facing at school, interesting parts of the Bible, and they would let us discuss it, with them guiding us and helping us and providing pointers along the way. But the feeling in the room was very much that they were giving us the opportunity to explore for ourselves and figure things out for ourselves. And so again, it played a really key part in growing that sense that faith was something that I could engage with and take on for myself, and also something that could stand up to being discussed. And I think that was really important, this sense that they could let us freewheel, let us engage with it. It was okay if we didn't all immediately come to the orthodox answer, because God is big enough and real enough that we can engage with him and figure it out in our own way.
You said that going to university was the absolute making of you as a person. And yet for some people, it can also be the root of serious trouble. You also said that it enabled you to manage the tension between university ideas and church ideas. What was the tension, and how did you resolve it?
Yeah, kind of three parts to that question, I guess. I was very lucky to go to Cambridge University, and I found my people in the way that school I did not find my people. I went there, and within weeks, within days, I was. I mean, you talk about fish in water. I was just kind of, oh my gosh, these people are lovely. This is my place. This is where I belong. Who knew it could be like this? This is so great. So it was a joy, and all 3 years was just. It was so fun. The people were so lovely. And I did English, so I did barely any work. So my wife is a doctor. She did a lot of work. I did no work. I had about 4 hours a week where I did work. It was great. The second part of the question was around some people find it can be a really difficult time for their faith. And I think, nothing revolutionary to say here, but it's the first time in your life that you are fully in control of your time, fully in control of your commitments, fully in control of your own space. You've got your own room, with no parents going to come in, And so, for some people, it is the point at which they either consciously or unconsciously sort of throw everything to the wind and go, blank piece of paper, who am I, what am I going to be? And if what I've been for the last 18 years is part of a Christian home, I'm going to sort of throw that off and do something else. There is no formula as to how it's going to strike people, but I think I was incredibly fortunate that the Christian community in Cambridge was so vibrant, and again, just full of such brilliant people, and it was such a fun thing to be part of. Just lovely people who are all really passionate about Jesus, and so it just scooped me up, and I sorted it out. I wanted to be part of it, and one of the great things about Christian community at any stage of life is the fact that you can walk into a place where you know nobody and walk into the Christian place and go, hello, could I be part of what you're doing? And the people will go, yes, fantastic, come in, you're our brother, you can be part of this. And that's at any age, at this stage of life as well as then is glorious. On the third point, I think around the tension between Christian ideas and university ideas. Essentially, for me, what that looked like was I went to a pretty conservative church at Cambridge because that's where all the pretty girls in my college went, so I followed them. And I was also, as I said, doing English, and the whole kind of theory of practical criticism that we were doing, literary criticism, was that there is no such thing as a single objective truth. Truth is created when you read a text. When you read it, you interpreting that text is what creates meaning. And so there are therefore as many possible meanings as there are people. That was basically the sort of fundamentals of the theory that I was learning in my lectures and my seminars. And I could see a lot of sense in that. We do all bring our own personalities and our own identities to everything in life. At the same time, my church was very much telling me there is one interpretation of the Bible. It's A plus B equals C, and that's it. And now we've done this first, next. And so that was actually a very helpful counterweight to what I was learning in my lectures. Now, it's not to say that I think that the church had it all completely right. I do think a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more recognition of the complexity of life and the complexity of Scripture. The Bible is very far from a straightforward book a lot of the time. But it also helps to balance out this kind of sense in my degree that there is no meaning in anything really other than the meaning we create. And so those two things, again, by God's grace, kind of balanced out to help grow my faith rather than destroy it, I think.
It was while you were at university that you met your wife, Jess. I think you were leading the Christian Union together. You were married in 2018. Tell me a little bit about Jess and the difference that she has made to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been looking forward to this because Jess absolutely hates me saying nice things about her in public, and she's here, so I'm going to embarrass her. Recently we watched the film Ratatouille, which is a Disney Pixar film about a rat who becomes a chef in Paris. And if you haven't seen it, you should watch it because it's fantastic. And there's a brilliant scene where at the end the critic, the restaurant critic, who is the villain of the piece, comes to the restaurant to serve judgment on the main characters. And the waiter comes to his table and asks him what he would like that evening. And he says, "Do you know what I'm craving? Some fresh, clear, well-seasoned perspective." And I think that's a good answer to what Jess brings to my life. Jess brings perspective. As a doctor in the NHS, Jess has proper stress to deal with. She comes home from work, and I'm like, I had to send some emails, and there were some Zoom calls, and some people were mean to me. And Jess is like, well, a man died, and then another one, and then somebody exploded. And, you know, and so, yes, Jess keeps my life in perspective and is wonderful and God's greatest gift to me. But I won't harp on about that because she won't like it.
Okay. You moved to London, and God provided you with an amazing church, St. Luke's, Earl's Court. Why was it amazing?
Yeah, St. Luke's was a brilliant period of my life. So I moved to London, as many people do, from university, and lived with 3 friends in a flat, classic kind of post-university experience. 3 of us in what really should have been a 2-bed flat. And I wanted to go to church, and so we were sort of 10 minutes walk from Holy Trinity Brompton, HTB, and so that sort of felt like the obvious thing to do, just to go to HTB. But there was a church 30 seconds from the front door, and so I thought, well, I should try that one first, because then I'll be able to get up later if I go to that one. And walked in, and within seconds was scooped up by the vicar, a guy called Adrian, who was just so wonderful, had such a ministry of welcome. He would remember your name, no matter how odd it was, no matter if it was from a language you'd never heard before, he would remember it to the letter, and then the next time you walked in, even if it was 3 months later, he'd be like, "Ah, so-and-so, it's you," and he'd remember the things that you'd talked about. And he did that to us and welcomed us in, and it became home for the next 6 years. And there were many things that were wonderful about it, but in particular, the thing that was incredible, which is such a privilege of living in central London, was that it was incredibly multinational. So we had about 35 nationalities represented within a congregation of about 120 at the absolute most. And we had people from America, people from Iran, people from Mongolia, people from Kenya, people from Russia, people from South Korea, from just every possible point of the compass. And it was such an instruction in the variety and multifacetedness of the church that God works through all different kinds of people in all different kinds of ways, and the church looks like all sorts of different things all over the world. And in particular, I was so struck, it was such a lesson in, there is nothing else I can think of that would bring that group of people together regularly to call each other family and to work together and to love each other and to look after each other. People from hugely different cultures, and there was also a massive difference in economic prosperity across the church. Kensington and Chelsea is sort of famously the most unequal district in the UK. It has the biggest gap between its richest and poorest residents. And so we had people who were living in council flats who were fighting awful damp in their walls and really living in really difficult situations, through to people in multi-million-pound mega mansions. And it was just amazing to see how the person of Jesus and the gospel brought those people together to be family. I ended up being the warden at that church, and our vicar left in January 2020, and if you can remember what happened in March 2020, you'll know that was not a great time for the vicar to leave, not that he knew that was going to happen. And so I ended up co-leading the church through interregnum and lockdown at the same time, which was fun. But we got out the other side of it.
Josh, just to continue with faith matters, just for a moment. In 2021, you moved with Jess to Chester from London and went from a huge church involvement to slightly less. And you had to relearn your role, going from church warden. So how did you cope with the transition? Because over our lives, some of us will go from one church to another church. They are different. How did you cope with that?
Yeah, it's a good segue into talking about LICC and the work that we do. we moved up and we joined a wonderful church in Chester called Vineyard 53, which I love. But yeah, I went from being church warden and in all the meetings and, talking to the bishop and knowing about the finances and all that stuff, to just being one of the punters. And as you said at the start, it's very easy to slip into a mindset that the more involved you are in church and the more time you're giving to church, and when I say church, I mean gathered, the organizational bit of church, the better you're doing as a Christian and the more you're doing for God and with God. And so to go from running a church to just primarily attending a church, even though in my head I knew that that proposition wasn't true, I found myself thinking, oh gosh, this is really odd. This is the first time really in my adult life that I've not been as involved in church as I could possibly be. Even though I was working for a Christian charity 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, I still had that kind of knee-jerk reaction that I have to join every rota I can join in order to be a good Christian. And I can talk in more detail about the different perspective that LICC brings to this, but basically, the key thing that I had to relearn, and I think that's actually really key for the UK church as a whole, and this is what LICC is about, needs to, or will do well to put more emphasis on, is the critical value in our walk as Christians and in our mission as Christians of the places that we're in Monday to Friday, the places that we're in when we're not gathered together with other Christians, that those times when we are gathered together with other Christians like this are extremely important and extremely valuable, but they are valuable and important because we are called to join in God's mission outside these walls. And what we do in here is about equipping us and empowering us for what God is calling us to outside the walls. And so I kind of had to, even though I'd been talking that game for the preceding couple of years at LICC, that was for me a moment where it became real to me and I had to go, how does this look for me in my life?
In 2019, you joined LICC, which is where you are now. What is LICC and what is your role in it?
Yeah, so as you said, LICC stands for the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, which isn't catchy, and that's why we say LICC. And the potted history is that we were founded in 1982 by John Stott, who some of you may or may not have heard of, but was a very influential thinker and writer and church leader in the 20th century, named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people of the century. And he founded LICC because, as the story goes, I'm sure it wasn't just this conversation, I'm sure the idea was in his head, but he had a conversation with two students who said to him, basically, why should we care about anything that this 2,000-year-old Palestinian preacher of yours has to say? He doesn't know what it's like to be a human being in the year 1982. He doesn't know about the AIDS crisis. He doesn't know about nuclear bombs. He doesn't know about computers. He doesn't know about anything, what it's like to be a human now. What on earth has Christianity got to say to me? And John Stott obviously thought to himself, well, that's not true. The Bible is still as relevant now, and the faith of the church is still as relevant now, and Jesus is still as alive now as he was 2,000 years ago. And so he founded LICC to help people think about how do we live as Christians in the modern world? What does it look like to apply our faith in the modern age? And for the first 20 years or so of LICC's existence, a lot of what it did was training courses, and John Stott wrote a book called Issues Facing Christians Today, and LICC provided a lot of perspectives and theology on specific issues, like some of those things I mentioned there, what the Bible might say to us about these particular tricky issues. And then over the last 20 years, we still do a lot of that stuff. We publish a blog every week called Connecting with Culture that gives biblical perspectives on particular issues of the day, particular news stories. But we are also now focused on not just how do we think about and talk about particular cultural issues, but how do we equip people for the detail of their everyday lives. And often the way that our church services are structured and the way that we talk and the way that we think very often points us towards more church involvement as the kind of end goal of a really good, well-lived Christian life. And again, that is so, so, so important. But LICC exists to try and help us all think, okay, where am I going to be tomorrow morning? Thinking right now, where are you and I going to be tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, or tomorrow at 3 p.m., or tomorrow at 7 p.m.? What might God be doing there? What might it look like for me to join in with his mission when I'm making a spreadsheet, fixing someone's boiler, looking after the kids, whatever it might be? And so, our mission is to help people discover the ways that God works through us in our everyday lives, the value of our everyday tasks, and realize the fact that the gospel actually is a whole life gospel, that God works in and through every part of our existence. And within that, my role is I'm the head of communications, as you said. So I'm responsible for all of our external comms, so all our emails, our website, our social media, our PR work, and for getting the message out, basically.
Just to follow up on what you just said there, I want to jump a couple of questions. In your LICC website, it talks about the weekday stuff with questions like, how would Jesus debate politics? How would Jesus do the washing up? How would Jesus deliver pizzas? And how would Jesus live your life? What is that trying to convey to us in those analogies?
So fundamentally, what it's trying to convey is that there is no divide in our lives between God stuff and not God stuff. So it's not that some of the things you do are valuable to God and important to God, and when you are at church, or when you're volunteering for a charity, or when you're at a prayer meeting, God is looking down and going, nice work, that's a good, obviously he is going, that is a good thing, those are good things to do. But it's not that when you leave those settings and then go and do your job as a checkout attendant in Sainsbury's, or your job as a lawyer, or you're a parent, or you're a grandparent, or whatever, that in those moments that God is looking down and going, could you get back to the God stuff? Could you get back to the holy stuff, please? All of our lives are places where God is at work, and all of our tasks can be to his glory. And so the point of those questions on the website, how would Jesus deliver pizza, how would Jesus debate politics, how would Jesus make spreadsheets, is that if it's done to him and for him and with him, everything we do can be transformative. So to put some detail on that, we did some research about 10 years ago now with some young Christians in Scotland, and we got them together and we asked them, how do you see God working in your everyday life? What ways do you see God at work when you are in those ordinary everyday places? And over the course of that research project, we synthesized 6 different ways that God works through us in our everyday lives. And these are, they're not kind of brand new things that LICC's come up with. They are essentially entirely biblical and throughout the Bible. But they were kind of ways of phrasing these things, perhaps, that are quite helpful to help us think this through. So the 6 M's of fruitfulness, because obviously, as good evangelical Christians, everything has to be alliterative. The 6 M's of fruitfulness that we identified, and then over the last 10 years have been really powerful and really true, let's see if I can remember all 6 of them, is that we get the chance in our everyday lives, first of all, to model godly character. So to show to the people around us the way of life that comes from being in step with the Spirit, modeling the fruit of the Spirit, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, etc. We get to make good work. So the tasks that we get to do day to day are not in themselves a distraction from what we should be doing as Christians. They are opportunities to glorify God. So a really, really good account spreadsheet, just for example, is a thing of beauty and a thing that gives glory to God, because keeping a company on the straight and narrow, enabling people to make accurate budgets, enabling people to ensure that nothing is being stolen or misspent or misused, enabling the leadership team to make accurate decisions, all that kind of thing, if it's done well and done truthfully, is good work. And that principle applies whatever your task may be. So making good work is really important. We get to minister grace and love is the third one to the people around us. So wherever you happen to find yourself, if you're somebody that others know will come alongside them and give them the listening ear, the extra bit of help, the extra bit of time, that is extremely valuable, good, godly work. And so many of us will have been in places where there is a culture around us of negativity. And if you find that one person who is actually going to help you and actually going to be there for you, it can be massive. I mean, I know from my own experience that there are people you work with, for example, who drag you down and make you feel awful and you don't want to be around them. And then there are people who lift you up and encourage you. And us being those people is totally transformative. And that links on to the fourth one, which is molding culture. And this is a particularly kind of tricky one sometimes for us to do, but every place that we find ourselves in, every workplace, every school gate, every cafe, every, wherever we might find ourselves, every family, every relationship has culture, the way that things are done there. And sometimes that culture can be really positive and it really builds you up. And sometimes that culture can be really negative. And you know what it's like when you go somewhere where you discover quickly, oh, the culture here is of negativity. That people, as soon as the door is closed behind somebody, everyone else is going to start attacking them because there's just a culture of negativity or whatever it might be. We have an opportunity as followers of Christ in that place to help mold the culture to be more like the kingdom of heaven. How can I encourage the way that things are done around here to better reflect what God would want it to be? How can I make it more like heaven? The fifth one is being a mouthpiece for truth and justice. So again, in any situation you might be in, there will be times where you have to be the person who stands up and says, I don't think this is right. I don't think this is fair. I don't think this is truthful. I don't think this is okay. And being the person who steps up and says, I'm actually going to be the one who's brave here and says, this isn't right. That is really good, godly work. Or it might be that a colleague isn't being treated well and you are the one who makes the effort to ensure that they get treated as they should be. Or it might be in your family or your friend group. You might be in a friendship group where there's really unpleasant banter and you're the one who steps up to say, could we not talk about each other in that way? And you show a better way of being. And then the final one, the sixth M, which if we've done all the other five, is much more likely to land well with people, is being a messenger of the gospel. And this is, in a sense, the one that we're all the most familiar with. We're all aware that we need to speak of our faith and tell people about Jesus. And what we found over the years is that when we represent Jesus well by doing the other five, then speaking about him is much more likely to land because people will have seen in our lives, in the way we behave, something of the reality of the gospel. So to wrap all of that up, the point is we're trying to help people recognize that they will probably already be doing at least some, if not all, of those M's in the places that they're in every day. And they might be places that they've never thought of as being a venue for mission before. They might never have thought of their shift in the local coffee shop as a mission field. But actually, the way that they make that coffee, the way they treat their customers, the way that they mold the culture for their colleagues, the way they ensure the businesses run fairly, the way they speak about Jesus when they get the chance, all of that is stuff they're probably already doing and certainly could do. And so it's not about generating a big to-do list of like, great, I've got 6 things I've got to do every day now. That's terrifying. But it's saying this is probably already happening and God cares every bit as much about that stuff that we do every day as he does about the brilliant things that happen on Sunday morning or Tuesday night, which is important, but not everything.
You've got to be really passionate about what you're doing to do what you're doing, because you left prior to this a relatively well-paid job and went into this. How is LICC funded?
Well, I would love to say I'd left a well-paid job. I didn't actually take a pay cut when I left my previous job. PR is not as well paid as it's made out to be. I previously was working in a marketing agency in London and then moved to LICC. LICC is a charity, so it's funded by a combination of legacies and trusts and funds. There are trusts that give money to charities like us, And we also have individual donors as well. So we have people who support us directly. I have completely failed in my role as head of communications this evening because I've totally forgotten to bring any LICC literature to give out to you. But thankfully, the website is very easy to remember, licc.org.uk. Once again, licc.org.uk. If you'd like to support us, that's the place to go. And just to find out about our work.
I had a question earlier on, which was about, give us some examples about the Monday to Saturday. How can we be more effective Monday to Saturday? Because there is a tendency to want to blend into the background. Is it a case of waiting for an opportunity? How do we become more relevant in our faith Monday to Saturday than we are meeting together on a Sunday?
So I think I'm trying to get which order to answer this in. I think the key thing, how do we make a difference where we are? How do we become more effective, was your phrasing. As I said before, it's about noticing what's already going on. It's about noticing the opportunities we already have. So we can sometimes feel like I am leaving the God place on Sunday. I'm leaving the church. I'm leaving the Christian space. And I've got to sort of take the Godness, the goodness, the spirit, the gospel. I've got to take it with me into the place where I'm going, where it is not. And I've got to somehow try and get the gospel across in that place. And it's me and then nothing else around me. Actually, the perspective I think that's probably more helpful and more true is that there is nowhere on this earth that God is not moving. There is nothing in creation that God is not intimately involved in and sustaining and interested in. And God graciously invites us into his work. God is not dependent on us for his work. So thinking about how can we be more effective where we are is about saying, let me take a moment to look around me, and with those 6 M's are a really helpful framework to do this, and think, what am I already doing that I could perhaps be a bit more intentional about? You know, when have I had opportunities to be the person in the room who speaks for the fair treatment of staff or the true reporting of finances, for example? Maybe I need to be more intentional about seeing that as my ministry in that place. Or maybe you look around and realize, oh, I had a chance a couple of days ago to help a couple of my friends make up. And I haven't really thought about that as anything important, but maybe actually I've got something of a ministry of reconciliation. Maybe I'm good at helping people listen to each other and heal divides between people. It's noticing the things around you that you might already be doing, that God is already doing, and giving you the opportunity to join in with, and then being more intentional about those things. Or likewise, it might be saying, what's the need around me? You know, I might know that I'm in a culture at work or wherever I am in the week that's really unpleasant. Well, what small things could I do that might start to shift that culture? And the other thing that's really important with this, and this is a thing we found repeatedly, is that actually it's quite hard to do that for yourself. It's quite difficult to look at your own life and your own actions and go, oh, I'm good at X, Y, Z. Some people are good at that. They're good at telling their own strengths. But for a lot of us, it's really hard to do that. And what we found is that actually, most of the time, people are much better at spotting other people's strengths and the way that God is using other people. And so it's actually really valuable in church. This is one of the reasons that church community is so important. When you're talking to other people on a Sunday morning or in a small group or just meeting for coffee or whatever it is, having those kind of sensors switched on in your brain to listen to what that person is telling you about their daily life, or if they're not telling you about it, to ask about it, and to hear and to notice the things that God might have been doing through that person that you can affirm and that you can call out and you can say, have you ever thought about the fact that that might be God inviting you to do something, or that might be God working through you, and that might be something you could do that's really fruitful, and encouraging one another in that way, it can be really, really powerful. Yeah.
A couple of final questions, and one particularly important. I asked you to consider one issue that really troubles you in the world today. And you told me you're worried about the caliber of politicians today. Aren't we
This is
all?
where it gets spicy.
Who lean towards nationalism and populism and self-interest. And the Christians are prepared to support these values. Just tell me a little bit more about your concerns.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? And I should say I'm neither a politics expert nor an anthropologist, and I should sort of take my LICC hat off for this bit, and this is just me. Although that said, I did just write an article on this topic for LICC. If you go on the LICC website, it'll be at the top of the blog. In essence, the thing at the moment that concerns me is I've been in quite a few spaces and been aware of quite a few conversations where Christians who are deeply committed in their faith, deeply committed to the gospel, deeply concerned to see more people in this country come to know Jesus, at the same time being quite willing to work with a certain kind of politician or leader who exhibits very little of the sort of fruit of the Spirit we might expect to see from somebody who is either a Christian or is compatible, shall we say, with the gospel. Leaders who exhibit very little gentleness, very little self-control, very little kindness, very little humility. And I could be more specific than that, but I don't want this to sound like a pub rant. But I think essentially the thing that we probably need to be quite careful of as a church in this particular moment in this country is that we are living through a very new cultural moment, because for the first time in 1400 years, the church in this country is a minority group. It's not in cultural power. We are not in charge of very much at all in the country. And for most of the preceding 1600 years in the West, the church has been extremely powerful in culture, in government, in leadership. And so for us, all of us in the room and in the church in the country at the moment, we are having to figure out what does it look like to be the church in the West in a post-Christian culture. And that's a really, really difficult question, and it's a really scary thing. And for a lot of us, it feels as though all the old certainties are slipping away, and everything that we used to know about how the church in this country worked is disappearing. And what on earth can we do about that? And the danger, I think, is that we can respond to that sense that our certainties are disappearing by clinging on to anything that sounds like it might bring them back. And there are some leaders who are suggesting that we can legislate a Christian culture back into place, that we can kind of forcibly bring back this country's Christianness. And unfortunately, a lot of the leaders who are saying that often do not echo in their lives what they might say with their mouths. And I essentially feel like we just need to be very careful that if we are overlooking a lack of humility, a lack of gentleness, a lack of kindness, a lack of humility, I already said humility, in these leaders, that is probably a warning sign that we should be taking very seriously. And yes, I could go on, but I'll stop it there.
It's really encouraging to sit and talk to somebody your age with their life ahead of them in the world you're in today. We've seen a lot in our lives, but the world is changing at a very, very fast pace, and you're being true to your faith in a world that is not where it should be over many, many issues. And with modern technology, we hear things every single day that are hurtful and upsetting, and being true to your faith isn't always easy. So I appreciate what you've just said. Josh, a final question. What would you personally value prayer for in your work today?
I would value prayer for the mission of LICC, and just to link this to that last question about, or that last point about staying true to your faith as a younger person in culture today. There's a lot of research been done over the last few years that points to a picture which shows that a lot of young people leaving the church are not necessarily doing so because they have decided categorically that God isn't real, and so this is all a sham and I'm leaving. Most often, young people drift out of the church because they feel that it's not relevant to their lives, that it has no connection to the actual detail of what they really experience every day. And so a really key part of how we adapt to this moment in culture and we best disciple the younger generations in the church is helping them to see how faith is relevant to the uni subject, to the nights out in the club with their mates, to playing football on a Saturday morning, to watching Netflix on a Wednesday night, to all the stuff that actually makes up their life, how God and faith and the gospel connect to those things, what a Christian life in all of its myriad detail looks like. And that is a really key part of why LICC exists, to help us build, all of us and the church as a whole, to build a more holistic understanding of what the Christian life looks like, and that helps to then increase its relevance to people because they can join the dots and go, I've learned this about who God is and who Jesus is and what the gospel says, and I can see how that affects the way I live, how that affects the sense of purpose in my life, how it affects the way I understand morality, how I understand the decisions I should make, how I go about my job, how I go about my friendships. So I would appreciate prayer that not just through LICC, but generally we see that growing sense of a holistic understanding of how our faith impacts our lives. Not least because, final point, I think, having talked about, I don't think it's very wise for us to ride on the coattails of leaders who promise us a return to the good old days. I do think it's wise for us to be equipping the whole church to live out their faith in all the details of their lives. That is how we will see societal transformation. That is how we will see the gospel reaching people, is when everybody in the church is empowered and equipped for the specific place out in the world that God has put them. So that is what I think we should pray for.
Josh, you've brought an awful lot to us tonight. Really, you can tell you can hear a pin drop. We really appreciate you coming. We really appreciate what you've had to say. We wish you all God's blessings in all that you're doing, and may it continue. He's got his hand on you. We can see that. And for you and Jess and your future, God's blessing to both of you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Hinton.